Some mornings I just sit here and listen to the house breathe, the groan of the old wood in the floor, the low hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. It's a quiet language, one you only learn to speak after a lifetime. For the longest time I believed this quiet was something you earned like a pension. You put in the work, you kept your head down, you walked a straight line, and eventually the world would grant you a little corner of peace. But I've come to understand it differently now. This quiet isn't a gift, it's something you purchase, and the price is paid every single day in small installments with pieces of yourself you don't ever get back. What does it cost a man to simply be left alone? My name is Harold Eugene Mitchell. I'm 80 years old. In my garage, there's a heavy wooden toolbox my father gave me 70 years ago. The brass key is worn smooth from my thumb, and the lock makes a crisp, satisfying click when it turns. Inside, every tool has its place. My hammers, my wrenches, my levels, all clean, all in order. It's a small, perfect kingdom where everything makes sense, where every piece fits just right. Some days the whole world feels like that. It's like a well-made joint in a piece of furniture. Everything lines up clean and true. But then you have to step outside your own door, and you feel the grain of the world is all wrong. You ever notice that? My name is Harold Eugene Mitchell. I'm 80 years old. When you get to be my age, you've seen the world change its clothes more times than you can count. But you start to notice the body underneath stays pretty much the same. You learn that most of life isn't about the big storms you see on the news, but about the subtle shifts in the air that tell you one is coming. It's about learning to read the quiet things, the way a person holds their shoulders, the pause before they speak, the look that's gone before you can even name it. These are the things that tell the real story, the one that's written between the lines of what people say. I remember one Tuesday, I was working on an old tube radio from the 40s, a beautiful mahogany thing with a cloth speaker grill. It had belonged to my wife, Sarah. The sound was warm, but it had a hum I couldn't chase out. After taking the back off, I saw the problem. A tiny glass and wire fuse, no bigger than my pinky nail, had blown. It was an odd size, something you wouldn't find at the corner shop. I knew there was a new big box hardware store over on the other side of town, the kind with bright lights and aisles that go on forever. I didn't much care for places like that, but I wanted to hear that radio play clear again. So I put the old fuse in an envelope and drove over. The place was just as I expected. Cold air, polished concrete floors, and a silence that felt manufactured. I like a store to have a bit of life, the smell of sawdust or oil, but this was sterile. I walked the aisles, feeling a little out of place, but focused on my task. Aisle 4, electrical. That's where I was heading. I saw him then, a young fella, Couldn't have been more than 20, with a bright orange apron. He was stocking shelves, but his eyes kept finding me. As I moved down the aisle, he moved with me, always about 20 feet behind. It wasn't direct, but it was noticeable, like a shadow you can't quite shake. I tried to ignore it, telling myself he was just doing his job. I found the fuses, a whole wall of little plastic drawers, each with a different number. I pulled out my envelope and started comparing the old part to the labels. It took concentration. That's when the young man stepped closer. The air seemed to get a little thicker. He didn't ask if I needed help finding something, which is what a clerk does. Instead, his voice was just a bit too loud, a bit too sharp, when he asked, "What project are you working on with that?" It wasn't a question of curiosity. His eyes weren't looking at the fuse. They were looking at me. It was a quick, nervous assessment, the kind you give to something you're not sure about, something that might not belong. In that moment, I wasn't a customer anymore. I wasn't a man trying to fix his wife's radio. I was a problem to be managed. I could feel the change in my own body, my shoulders tightening up. All the simple pleasure of my little project just evaporated. It was replaced by that old familiar weariness. On the outside, I just held up the tiny fuse and said, in a quiet voice, "Just an old radio." I didn't give him the satisfaction of my anger. I didn't give him anything but the simple truth. But inside, I felt the walls of that bright, clean store closing in. The space that had felt big and open a moment before now felt small and suffocating, and I was the reason why. I found the fuse I needed, a little $2 part. I walked to the front, paid the cashier, and didn't look back. The walk to my car felt 100 miles long. Sitting in the driver's seat, I held the new fuse in the palm of my hand. It was so small, so insignificant, but it felt heavy. It felt like it had cost me more than a couple of dollars. It had cost me that peaceful feeling I'd had in my garage that morning. The quiet I drove home in wasn't the comfortable quiet of my house. It was a heavy, tired quiet. I had gotten the part I needed, but I had left a little piece of my own peace behind in that store, on that polished concrete floor. Driving home, the silence in my old truck was louder than any argument I could have started. For a few hot seconds back there, standing in that aisle, a younger man inside of me wanted to stand up straight and ask that boy what his problem was. I wanted to make him feel as small and as foolish as he was making me feel. I had the words all lined up in my head, but another voice, one much older and far more tired, just whispered, "What for, Harold? What for?" It wasn't about dignity, not really. It was a simple calculation of cost. And the price of that confrontation would have been the last bit of peace I had left for the day. So I paid with my silence instead. You spend a lifetime learning to swallow your own fire. You learn to make yourself smaller, less of a question mark in a room. You straighten your back, but not too much. You make eye contact, but not for too long. You speak clearly, but not too loud. It becomes a kind of second nature, this constant management of other people's unease. And the ugliest part of it is that for a flicker of a moment, you even start to question yourself. You run through the checklist. Were my hands in my pockets? Was I walking too slow? It's a poison that tries to make you believe you are the one who is sick, that you are the source of the discomfort. Even now, sitting here all these years later, I can't tell you if I did the right thing. There's a part of me that thinks the old man in that store let the young man down by not speaking up. But there's another part that knows I was just an old man trying to fix a radio. I wasn't there to teach a lesson or to wage a war in aisle 4. I was just there to buy a fuse. The battle wasn't with the boy in the orange apron. It was with myself. It was the old, familiar fight between the man the world sees and the man I know myself to be. That's a conflict you don't win. You just learn to endure it. My granddaughter Lena came by the following Saturday. She's a whirlwind, that one. 28 years old, an architect building things I can hardly imagine. And she carries herself like she owns any room she walks into. She has a fire in her that I recognize because it used to burn just as hot in me. She came in, kissed my cheek, and before she even sat down, she was telling me about a meeting she'd had. She'd been presenting designs to a new, wealthy client, and her voice was tight with an anger that was still fresh. She paced my small living room as she spoke, her hands cutting through the air, painting a picture of the conference room, the slick table, and the man sitting across from her. He told me I was so articulate, she said. And the way she spat the words out, you'd think they were poison. So professional. She stopped pacing and looked right at me, her eyes demanding I feel the same sting she felt. She wanted me to be angry with her, for her. And I was, in my own way. But it was a different kind of anger. It was old and heavy, not sharp and new like hers. I heard that man's surprise in her story, the unstated shock that she, a young black woman, could command a room with such intelligence. It was the same surprise I saw in the hardware store clerk's eyes, just dressed up in a more expensive suit. I didn't say what she wanted me to say. I didn't raise my voice or curse the man's name. I just gave a slow nod and turned my gaze to Sarah's old radio sitting on the workbench. In that moment, I saw it all so clearly. I saw the fresh cut on her spirit, and I knew, with a certainty that only 80 years can give you, that it would heal into a scar. It was a wound I knew by heart. She was just learning about the quiet tax, the price you pay for surprising people by simply being good at what you do. Her fire was bright, and I hoped it would stay that way. But I knew what it cost to keep a flame like that burning. For most of my life, I believed that respectability was a kind of armor. My father believed it, and he passed that belief down to me like a family heirloom. If your shirt was pressed, if your shoes were shined, if you spoke clearly and stood up straight, you were building a fortress around yourself. We thought that if we were twice as good, twice as polite, we could present a version of ourselves that no prejudice could penetrate. It was a strategy for survival, a deeply held faith that if you performed dignity without a single flaw, the world would have no choice but to grant it to you in return. It felt like a fair exchange, a contract for safe passage. The truth I learned, the one that only arrives after the sun has set on most of your days, is that the armor was never for my protection. It was for their comfort. All that effort, the polished shoes, the perfect grammar, the quiet deference, it didn't change the way they saw me. It only made my presence in their world less inconvenient for them. It was a service. I was silently managing their anxieties, making myself neat and tidy so they wouldn't have to feel uneasy. The shield wasn't deflecting their prejudice. It was just making it easier for them to live with it. It didn't keep me safe. It just kept things quiet. And when you finally understand that, it doesn't fill you with rage. Not anymore. It fills you with a profound and bottomless weariness. You see your entire life as a long series of quiet, unpaid labors. You realize you spent decades trying to be the perfect, unobtrusive guest in the house you were born in. That young man in the hardware store, the client who was so surprised by my granddaughter's talent, they weren't seeing the armor. They were only seeing the man they expected to see underneath it all. And no amount of polish was ever going to change their eyesight. That is a heavy, heavy thing to carry into your 81st year. Sometimes I watch the young people, my granddaughter and her friends, as they walk into a new room. They hold themselves with a certain determined brightness, a posture that is meant to declare, I belong here. But my old eyes see the tremendous effort it takes to maintain that pose. I recognize the cost of that energy because I paid it for decades. It's in the careful way they measure their words, making them sharp, but not too sharp, friendly, but not too familiar. They are constantly managing a small, invisible fire, trying to give off just enough light for people to see them clearly, but not so much heat that it makes anyone in the room uncomfortable. They still hope, I think, that the right performance will finally earn them their peace. We all have our own version of that hardware store, I suppose. A moment where the air in the room changed, and we suddenly felt the weight of something unspoken, a tax we didn't know we were being asked to pay. These are the stories that truly shape us, the ones told in the quiet spaces between the words people choose to use. If you feel like sharing in the space below, I'd be interested to hear what you've learned from those kinds of moments. Not for argument, and not for debate, but just for the simple sake of understanding one another a little bit better. Sometimes, just putting a quiet truth into words is the first step toward making a little peace with it.